Hello and welcome back to another one of these videos, a ranking of the Doctors. And yes, I have done this before, but it was going on 4 years ago now, and I've rewatched the entire classic series twice more. I've also seen the 60s and then additional time, so I've seen the 60s stuff 3 times. I've rewatched the modern series, and we have multiple new Doctors. We have more of Whittaker than we had at the time I made that video. We've also got a second 10th iteration for some reason. And we have Ncuti Gatwa, who at the time of recording has just 9 episodes under his belt. But I feel like I've got a good enough sense of him that I can make I can put him in here. And these rankings are always going to change. And basically, that's the reason why I'm doing this in any sense, is because I was looking back on that old video and my William Hartnell placement is a crime. He's in ninth place. And you will see when we get to him that I do not agree with that whatsoever anymore. He's become a real firm favourite of mine. But I'd only seen the classic series once when I made that video, so I feel like I wasn't quite as well informed on some of the classic Doctors, particularly, and some of them have been sort of bumped up the rankings a little bit as a result of those rewatches. So there's 5 tiers: S, A, B, C, D. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. I will be ranking them within their tiers, so there will be a numerical ranking towards the end, and I'm not going to take them in chronological order. In fact, I'm just going to go like this and see who I come upon. And I am coming upon Paul McGann, who is such an important Doctor, so important to the legacy of the show, who's the face of the show for years, but he has a very tiny amount of screen time in reality. Now, I've listened to his Dark Eyes audio, which is a bit naff, but he's very good in. And I've also listened to Chimes of Midnight, which is excellent, but I am not counting Big Finish, so I have to go solely on his TV stuff. And on that, I can't really push him higher than B because there's just not enough time for me to really connect in the same way I will with the people in the top 2 tiers of this list. But don't get me wrong, Paul McGann is excellent in this role, and the TV movie, which I don't like really at all, like it's fine. I've rewatched it a good number of times, but it doesn't feel like Doctor Who. But Paul McGann feels like the Doctor. He feels like the only person involved in the whole thing on the script level, on the cast level, that really knew what show they were adapting. Um, and whilst there's so much feels Americanized, he still feels like the Doctor. I think it's specifically the scene where he's trying on the new shoes and he's dancing about and he's talking about the sky above was a light and talk about the Gallifreyan sky and remembering his childhood. He is so enigmatic. He commands the screen, and that's such an important part of the Doctor for me. Like, this is my favorite fictional character of all time. I have some strong opinions. Most people will still be towards the top half of the list, but I think it's one of the things that I really look for in a Doctor is that whatever there's happening in the scene, whatever is going on, they are the person you look at. They command every room they walk into. To me, that's the core of the character, and McGann has that. And I really love Night of the Doctor, which is a 6-minute minisode made for the 50th. I think the dialogue is really strong. I think McGann plays this really well, like this weary iteration of the character. I really enjoy him. I wish we had more. And I think if there's one thing I would love to see Doctor Who do now that it's branching out into spin-offs, I know it's a bit woolly about whether you make a McGann spin-off because then there's kind of 2 versions of Doctor Who on at once. But I still want a McGann spin-off because we don't have enough McGann to work with. He's brilliant. He has a great voice. In fact, so many of these actors have brilliant voices. Tom Baker, John Hurt, Paul McGann, Peter Capaldi, they are 4 of the best voices in TV. And he translates really well on audio. If we were bringing audio in, I might be moving him up and even a tier higher, up to A tier. But like I say, basing it solely on what I've seen on screen, I'm going to go with this. And okay, I will take next. Do you know what? I think it would be beneficial to get some of these Doctors with very minimal screen time out of the way. So, Jo Martin. I think Jo Martin is a good actress, a fundamentally good actress, but she's also, I don't agree with her existing whatsoever in the first place. I think the idea of pre-Hartnell Doctors, I hate it. I despise it. I loathe the notion of incarnations of this character coming before William Hartnell. I've done a whole video on it. It undermines his arc. It undermines who he is and the importance of Ian and Barbara. I think it's disrespectful to the 60s and to the 250 episodes from An Unearthly Child to the War Games. And I don't think the story consequences of The Timeless Child have been enough to justify trampling on history in that way. I don't give a toss about lore or canon or how it messes with the Time Lords. I only care about this character, and I care about what it does to the entire point of the Doctor story arc in the 60s. And I hate it, but I've done a video on that. I'm not going to get into it. And that kind of blights my view of Jo Martin. But even then, even taking that out of the equation, there is nothing for me to work with here. She is a nothing character. Decent costume, love the TARDIS that she's got, very retro. I think it's way better than Jodie Whittaker's TARDIS. And a lot of people said, oh, that Martin turning up, you know, shows that female Doctor can work, which, by the way, I do believe a female Doctor can work. Just look at how amazing Michelle Gomez was as the Master. It can absolutely work. I just don't think it has worked because the 2020s have been shocking for Doctor Who. They really have. And Jo Martin, she has a good presence, but her entire personality is just being mean. She tells people to shut up all the time, and she acts like she's superior because she doesn't use technology. That's kind of her entire personality. She's in 4 episodes. John Hurt is in 1. And I have so much of a better understanding of who the War Doctor is than the Fugitive Doctor. I don't know anything about her. That's not because she's mysterious. It's just because there is nothing on the page for me to latch onto. And there was nothing on the page for Jo Martin to latch onto either. She has a good presence. She's doing what she can with a mediocre script. Like, she's in 4 stories, sometimes just cameoing in, but 4 stories, and yet I don't ever get a sense of who she is. Other than she's mean and she's cruel at one point to the Judoon when she dehorns the Judoon, which is apparently the greatest dishonor you can do to someone. And she says that's instinct kicking in. Like, I just find that a baffling writing choice on many levels. So no, I do not enjoy Jo Martin. She's easily my least favorite incarnation of the character. So yes, I do prefer Jodie Whittaker, which I will get to in due course. But yeah, for now, Martin is the bottom of this list. And I need to talk about some of the other ones. Do you know what? The Valiard is just going to go in C. Michael Jaston is not someone I expected when I opened this tier list to be here, but he is. So Michael Jaston's The Valiard is essentially the Doctor, or a dark reflection of the Doctor, who prosecutes himself on trial in Trial of a Time Lord. And there's not a lot for me to work with here, but the notion of a dark reflection of the character is pretty cool. So he's going in C. I don't really have much to say. I didn't expect to have to talk about him whatsoever here. Who I did expect to have to talk about, and who I do want to talk about now, is John Hurt. So, wow. With minimal screen time, John Hurt conveys everything about this character, everything that Jo Martin couldn't. And I think it's such a brilliant rug pull that they promise us this warrior Doctor, you know, the man who won the Time War. And he is just a tired, broken, war-weary man willing to do something terrible for the greater good. And it's so compelling to watch. And if you want a war-weary version of your character, why not cast the possibly the greatest British actor of his generation in John Hurt? I mean, imagine the casting coup of getting John Hurt. I mean, how did that conversation even go behind the scenes? You know, we want someone to play this character. Do you think we should phone John Hurt? No, John Hurt's not going to do Doctor Who. Well, John Hurt, Sir John Hurt, is the Doctor, and he immediately feels like the Doctor when he's on screen. Like, now, it's a massive feather in the cap of the War Doctor that his one story is Day of the Doctor. Like, the Valiard is in a handful of stories. They're Trial of a Time Lord stories. They're not that good. Jo Martin's in 4 stories. Most of them aren't that good. But John Hurt is in 1 story, and it is one of the greatest of all time. He conveys so much. I love that he gets this second chance, this opportunity at redemption. I love the fact that he refuses himself even the name of the Doctor because he doesn't believe that he is worthy of it anymore after all the things that he's done. But in that story, he's able to regain it and say that just for this moment, I am the Doctor again. He's an amazing, amazing cast, brilliantly played. I can't put him higher than B because I can't get all that connected to him because he's just not on screen all that much. But from what we had, and actually from I can't talk about the audios. I have heard an audio of his, and he's very good. But from what we got on screen, I think he's brilliant. I'm putting him below Paul McGann. Yeah, below Paul McGann. He's not quite what you expect from a Doctor, but then that is kind of part of the appeal with him. So now I'm going to properly randomize. I know I said I'd do that at the start, but I'm going to properly randomize this list now and just go across and see who I end up with. And who I've ended up with is Christopher Eccleston, who I'm throwing into A tier. So I didn't start watching the show in 2005. I actually came on board in 2010 with Matt Smith. So I didn't see Eccleston really for years until we got Netflix and I was able to go back and watch some of the back catalogue of the show. And he is fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. He really is. He brings something very new to the part, and I think that was one of the wisest decisions that Russell made. He's a very stripped back version of the character, even down to the outfit, um, with the black leather, which is ironically apparently what Colin Baker wanted, and he ended up looking like that. Um, but I just really enjoy Eccleston. I think he's got a great relationship with Rose, and that's something I'm going to keep coming back to. And it's something that kind of holds McGann and Mark her back a little bit. One of the most important things for any Doctor, for me, is how they feel with their companions. And Eccleston is great with Rose, who I don't really like all that much as a character, but they are great on screen together. I think he not overplays, is saddled sometimes with too much comedic dialogue. I think he plays it well. There is the odd bit that I do think he undersells, but his dramatic acting, like this is one of the best actors who's ever taken up this role, and he sells it. I'm thinking of the bit when the Auton recognizes the TARDIS in Rose. I'm thinking of when he remembers Gallifrey in the End of the World. I'm thinking of his performance in Dalek, in the finale, in the Empty Child Doctor Dances. I love that he gets that everybody lives moment, and he has such a distinct arc. Like there's like only a handful of Doctors who I really feel have a very set, specific arc, and in just 13 episodes, which to clarify is only a handful more than Ncuti Gatwa has got at this point. He is so well defined. He sells you completely on this iteration of the character. I really love Eccleston in this role. I think he's great and a brilliant choice to bring the show into the 21st century. I wish we had more of him. I've heard some of the audios, and he kind of plays a different character. He plays Eccleston doing Tennant, in my opinion. Like he's so much more cheerful, and I don't know. It didn't really work for me. Like I like that he's now enjoying playing the character, which apparently he didn't really when he was doing it on TV, but I don't really enjoy the audio Eccleston as much as the screen version. I just think it's so precious that we've got these 13 episodes, and that's kind of it. That's all we're ever going to get. Like this man is never going to play this character on screen again. That is what we're going to get, and he nails it in such a short period of time. Next up, okay, Tom Baker is in S tier, and there is no debate about that in my mind. The first time I watched through Tom, it took 6 seasons for me to go, I think he might be my favorite Doctor. Like he's gonna. It was when I watched City of Death. I remember distinctly finishing it, going outside, and just kicking a football about out the back, and thinking, I think I might have a new favorite. And he is phenomenal, especially in those Graham Williams years. He is so funny and quotable, and yet he is always in control. Like the way he jokes and japes around villains, and then he just flips. He also has a temper, which I think is very understated, but it does come up, especially in those early Hinchcliffe and Holmes years. He gives a really defining performance. I watched Genesis the other day. He's just a definitive version of the character, from the look to the voice to, for years people said that, Davison, Baker, McCoy, they used to be asked, why don't you have a big scarf? Doctor Who has a big scarf, and the reason is that Tom Baker is Doctor Who to so many people. Like he is the most iconic version of the character, of the classic series. Tennant is probably on a similar level with him as the most iconic version of the new series, but Tom Baker's legacy is phenomenal. He played the character for longer than anyone else. He has more episodes, more screen time than anyone else. I am so invested. He has amazing, amazing rapport with his companions, or his mainline companions. I think his on-screen rapport with Lalla Ward as Romana is probably the greatest Doctor companion chemistry we've ever seen. He's great with Mary Tam. He's great with not Lalla Ward, Louise Jameson, and he's phenomenal with Elizabeth Sladen. He is warm and funny, and yet he can be really like when he smiles so much that you when he really loses it, it feels like with nothing else. Like he is such a brilliant version of the character. I love his fourth wall breaks. He just is Doctor Who to me. He really is. That was a lot of gushing. Okay, what have we got next? I will say for Tom, and the reason he's not going to come number one, I think in season 18, he is kind of disinterested in the material. And fair enough. If I saw the script from Meglos, I would also be disinterested in it. But I do think that he does kind of lose a bit in that last series. But then that was not really his fault. It was a result of production decisions that were way above his head, and they were changing the tone of the show. They were taking a lot of the humor out. They were trying to be more serious, more grounded. It just didn't fit Tom Baker. But other than that, I mean, this is the best version of the character. Just a magnificent, magnificent performance. Next, we've got Tennant. I will take both Tennants and I will put them here and probably probably right. Yeah, maybe B. Either side of John Hurt. Okay, so John Hurt is in a Tennant sandwich. Let's remove that image. Okay, Tennant in the original run of in his original run, 2005 2010, is the most iconic version of the modern character, and sometimes that hurts me a little bit because when people talk about Doctor Who, there is this narrative that basically there's so many people who tell me they're Doctor Who fans when they find out I am one, and then they're just like, "Oh yeah, I love Tennant, didn't watch after that," and that frustrates me. But when I actually sit down and watch Tennant, he's great. He really is. And yeah, he frustrates me and annoys me sometimes, and I don't like his relationship with Rose, and I don't really like the way he treats Martha. But I appreciate that Russell Davies took the time to craft a Doctor with very real flaws. He is vain, he is arrogant, he sometimes neglects people, and he's rude. And at the end, I mean, this image is from Waters of Mars, or from the Waters of Mars promo, which is my favorite Tennant story. I love where that leads. I love where the whole last of the Time Lords thing goes. Now, I'm not saying that was the plan all along, because I don't believe it was. In fact, it wasn't, because Russell Davies was going to leave at the end of Series 4 before Waters of Mars. But I love what was done with the Time Lord Victorious, and that's why this Tennant is above this one. So there is a new Tennant, and it was good. It was kind of a very generic. Before I kind of wanted something a bit different. When they first announced they're bringing the character back, but he had a different look, and it was going to be a different Doctor. I was hoping maybe he'd use his Scottish accent, maybe he would be a bit darker, but he is kind of essentially just the same character. Personally, I just wish he wasn't called the 14th Doctor, but that's a very much a personal preference thing. But I don't really understand the need for that. But you know, there's highs and lows to the original Tennant run as a character. Like I don't really like him with Rose, but I love the darkness. I sometimes think he's a bit annoying and silly, but I really love the fact that the vanity was crafted so within the character. And he is so magnetic on screen. Like he delivers exposition like no one else. Like he just throws it out there, and it doesn't even feel like you're being talked at. It just feels so natural. He really feels like the character. So there's highs and lows to this character. The 2023 Tennant is just there. He was good. He has a lot of he's a middle of the road Tennant. He distills a lot of the nice qualities, and they cut out most of the hubris and the ego, which kind of makes the character so interesting to me. But he's also with Donna, who was paired up with the best, I think, easily. I think Donna is by far the best companion pairing that Tennant has. She really salvages his era for me, actually. I mean, I love Martha, but just Martha's completely neglected by the Doctor, and I really love their relationship of equals. So the fact that we have Donna with this 2023 Doctor, I think you get a lot of good stuff out of that. I mean, I wasn't a huge fan of everything that went on with By Generation and all that, which I'm sure I'm going to come to in a minute. But for now, I think B is fair. It could drop down to C, but I feel like I'm can't put him in the same tier as Michael Jackson. I wouldn't agree with that whatsoever. So let's see who's next. Peter Davison. Yeah, we'll chat Peter Davison just for Davison is an interesting one because I actually think he gets better the longer he's in the role. And the longer he's in the role, the stories get worse. It's actually bizarre. And he finishes with his best story, but I mean, on average, I think season 19 is better than season 20. And season 20 is largely better than season 21. It kind of, as things get worse in a story sense, he becomes more comfortable in the part. In season 19, I think the stories are pretty much great, but he's not quite there. Whereas in season 21, you get stories like Planet of Fire, which is just so boring. But Davison's really good in it, and I think he really comes into his own and becomes a truly great Doctor in that final run of the show. In terms of Resurrection, Planet of Fire, Caves of Androzani, he is amazing in the Caves of Androzani. Like so good. I enjoy him being snipey and sarky, but he is just a bit vanilla. And the thing that I have to note is that he does not command the room in the same way. Now, that feels very much wired into the last series of the show for him, season 21, I mean, where he cannot prevent the massacre in Warriors of the Deep. When he says there should have been another way, he should have found another way, but he does not have the personality that Pertwee had when Pertwee, really was able to try and negotiate a peace out with the Silurians and the Sea Devils. He doesn't have that same personality, and he cannot prevent them from carrying out their plans. In Resurrection of the Daleks, he loses control completely. And in Caves of Androzani, I feel like another Doctor would almost be able to talk their way out of it, whereas he just cannot get out of it. He doesn't have the charm of the previous incarnations. He doesn't have the gift of the gab. And I do think that's an interesting thing. It's just not necessarily to my taste. But I enjoy his action hero, the cricket ball, and all the stuff. I don't really love the costume, and because it feels like a costume. It doesn't feel like an outfit. It feels like a costume, like something you would pick in a fancy dress shop, as opposed to just, whatever the weirdness of so many of the other versions of this character are. But I do enjoy Davison. He is a bit sort of middle class and a bit, I don't even know how to describe it, but yeah, I don't adore his character. I don't adore his era, but I think both of them are decent. He's a very middle of the road Doctor for me. I'm very comfortable with his position there. I don't want to put him in the same tier as Michael Jayston, but he could have dropped down to C, but I'm going to keep him in B because I do feel like he really hits his stride in season 21 and he becomes a really great Doctor for me. Next up, William Hartnell. Bang. Amazing. Probably, in fact, there's no problem, but without question, the most underrated version of this character. And sometimes he was being underrated by me. And that was a couple of years ago when I made that video. I couldn't believe when I watched it that I put him in 9th. Could not believe it. But then, even in the video, I'm talking about how surprised I was that he was as high as 9th, because he does not have the best reputation amongst the fandom, in my opinion. Like, people don't talk about this Doctor as much. When you see lists of 10 best classic Who stories, Hartnell stories aren't on there. When people do rankings of Doctors, when it comes to the first 4 or 5 Doctors, he's always the lowest down of the lot. He's not normally below Colin Baker, but I would say he's usually below most of the other Doctors. He doesn't really get the respect he deserves, and people kind of, I think he's so badly mischaracterized in subsequent multi-Doctor stories like 5 Doctors, like Twice Upon a Time, that kind of just look at the Daleks and an Earthly Child and create this like parody of him where he's stern and grumpy. Basically, grumpy is the word that people constantly use. This is one of the funniest, brightest, most vivacious Doctors of the lot. William Hartnell is delightful. I love the comedic stuff he does. Every time he gets to play up the comedy, he nails it. And there's loads of comedy stories in his era. It's an era that is just so charming and so unique. I love his relationship with his companions, especially Ian and Barbara, and the impact they have on him. I love that he softens as he goes, that he starts almost, decidedly non-interventionist. And then, he could, and it's not even until the end of season 1 that he finally really has to take charge and be the person who, and that's just to rescue Ian and Barbara. You know, it's not till the Dalek invasion of Earth where he says that line to Ian, where he says we must put our wits together and defeat them, that he really takes any form of interventionist action. That's 2 seasons in. You know, we've had that's the 10th story of the show, and then you go all the way to the War Machines, where he stands in front of that oncoming war machine, and he just has completed his arc. He becomes the Doctor that we know and love in that moment, and the whole story of him on the show is of the slightly pompous Time Lord who regards himself higher than the humans, being humbled, being just taught humanity by Ian and Barbara, by Vicky, by Stephen, and it's just so compelling to watch. I love him on screen. He is so warm and delightful. I love his mischievous little laugh. People get this Doctor so wrong. Like, he is not just grumpy granddad. Yes, he can be stern and grumpy. That is a very charming and fun aspect of the character. But he is so much more than that. He is just one of the best. There's going to be 3 people in S tier. One of this lot are also going in S tier. He is a top 3 Doctor for me. I love every time I'm watching his era, which I've now done lots and lots of times. There's some stories I've seen there 6 or 7 times, like the Romans and the Aztecs and the War Machines. Like, I just adore those stories. Every time I'm like, is he the best? Is he the best? On his day, William Hartnell is the best Doctor. On his day, I don't think he's. This is probably due to the arc. In season 1, he's not the best. In season 2 and 3, this is the best Doctor. Categorically for me. I can't believe I just said that, but yes, he is. He is amazing and top 3 material for sure. Let's move on before I just continue to gush about William Hartnell. And Matt Smith, higher than Eccleston. He was my entry to the show. I honestly think he would be S tier if he didn't get slightly weaker as his era went on. But Series 5 Matt Smith is also most of the good Doctors are the best Doctor on their day. And in Series 5, Matt Smith is the best Doctor. In the same way that Season 17, Tom is the best Doctor. And Season 2 and 3, William Hartnell is the best Doctor. Like, so many of the greats on their day are the best version of the character. And I cannot make my mind up between them. But on average, I'm going to go with Smith just falling out of the S tier because I think he does get weaker as he goes along. You get a lot of hand flappy stuff and a bit sillier dialogue. But he's a monologue machine. He gives these great performances. I love his dynamic with his companions, be them Amy or Rory, River or Clara, you know, any of them. He's just so brilliant on screen. I love his childish warmth and enthusiasm, but the real pain and age behind him. He really does exemplify the old man in a young man's body thing. And yeah, I just think Matt Smith is sorry, such a brilliant version of this character. I've said that so many times, that exact sentence, but he really is. Um, yeah, I'll keep him in A. I'm almost talking myself into putting him in S tier, but we're keeping him in A for now. Um, Colin Baker. Colin Baker is above Peter Davison and he's above Tennant 2.0. He's not above John Hurt. He's a B tier. He's a B tier Doctor given largely D tier stories. I love Revelation of the Daleks. Vengeance on Varos is good. There's a handful of other ones that I find watchable. Most of it is terrible. His era is not good. I do not enjoy his relationship with his companions, really. I enjoy Mel more. I think his relationship with Perry is not great. I know she's generally regarded as like the definitive Sixth Doctor companion. I respect that if you love his era, that you would probably think that, but I find their relationship bordering on abusive because she's weirdly quietly spoken and diminutive, and he is really loud and obnoxious. And honestly, that's part of the charm, but it just doesn't work when he's put with her, in my opinion. He's very theatrical, which I enjoy. And I remember when I first finished season 23, I did have a real sense of, I'm kind of glad this year is done, but I'm really going to miss Colin Baker as a Doctor. I think he had so much potential, and this is probably the ultimate example of just screwed over by the state the Doctor Who was in the mid 80s. Like, the absolute state. I mean, you know, there's so many bad stories in this run. There really is, and in a very short run. You have the Two Doctors, which is appalling. You have the Twin Dilemma, which is awful. You have Mark of the Rani. Like, it's just really flipping bad. It really is. But he shines even in the weakest stories, even in the Twin Dilemmas, the Two Doctors. I still enjoy having him on screen. I think he was made too violent. I think sometimes he's too glib in the face of violence, especially in season 22. But yeah, I've heard a bit of him on Big Finish, and I really like him. I really like the actor. I like how invested he is in the show, in the character. He really gives his all, but sometimes the material just isn't there. And I think that's largely what holds Colin Baker back for me. So, where do we go now? Shutigawa. See, the Michael Jason tier. He is better than Michael Jason because he is actually a version of the Doctor. But currently, my position on Shutigawa is he is fun, and I am completely not invested in him as a character whatsoever. In fact, I don't really know anything about him as a character other than Shutigawa feels like he is just playing Shutigawa in a variety of costumes. Like, that is genuinely what it feels like. He's sort of big and camp and very loud. His relationship with Ruby to me was hollow in terms of they get on really well and they seem really fun, but I have no grounding in the companion relationship whatsoever. I don't feel there's any conflict there. They're just like silly best friends who have fun together, but we didn't earn that. And I just feel like that's so much of the show at the moment. Rusty Davies is writing the bits he's interested in and skipping all the stuff he's not interested in, like establishing the characters. He's just skipping or writing resolutions to stories or putting the political subtext actually in the plot. I did not enjoy the most recent series of the show, but Gatwa gives great performances in specifically Boom and Rogue, which are my two favorites in that series. He gives really strong performances. I think the fact that he's very emotional. I'm not saying it doesn't work for me, but I do think it diminishes what, because he cries in every episode. So when he cries inevitably in the trailer for the next series, I'll just be like, oh well, it's not going to be like something massive. You know, like there's a shot in the series 12 trailer of Jodie crying, and I remember just being like she's so unemotional. It's like, what is going to happen that's going to cause that? If I see, I watched him cry when the bogey monster got sucked out into an airlock, or didn't even successfully. I watched him cry when Jinx Monsoon came turned up because he was so scared. I've seen him cry at everything. Like, so it doesn't have the same impact. Uh, he's fun, but there's nothing really to latch onto there. I don't feel like there's any depths to this character. And I feel there were some weird bits where they were like, he credits Rose for making him so much more open, not Rose, Ruby for making him so much more open and vulnerable, but then he can't tell her that he loves her at the end of the series in a platonic way. He can't really like say that and have that kind of goodbye, which is weird because I thought we'd just established that. And I feel like there was an attempt, I don't know, post the therapy doctor here, I just assumed that we would unbuckle from the trauma of the past. But it seems like this was literally just so Tennant can have a happy ending. And we don't unbuckle from the trauma of the past because he's just the same character and he's still holding on to all this baggage and last the Time Lord stuff. And yeah, I mean, it feels safe. It feels very safe. Like, oh, Shooting Gatwa is a fun guy, so we'll just let him play himself. He doesn't do anything particularly dark. He hasn't done anything like that makes you question him. He hasn't done anything particularly interesting. He's just there and he's having fun. And do you know what? That's fine. But I will not be as invested in him without some serious character work as I am in almost all these other versions of the character, not including her. Jodie Whittaker is also in D tier, but I do prefer her to Jo Martin. Although I do think Jo Martin has a lot more screen presence. So what I mentioned about Peter Davison with regards to his lack of commanding the screen, Jodie Whittaker suffers from that as well, but in a different way, in the sense that I mentioned how it was woven into the text with Davison. It really was the fact that he wasn't the big personality of his predecessors affected the way stories ended. Whereas every time Jodie Whittaker tries to do a big speech or whatever, it tends to fall flat on its face. Yet everything works out fine, even though she never seems to have a clue what's going on. I don't know. I didn't enjoy that. I thought her relationship with her companions was weird. The dialogue being so wooden and stilted is not her fault. It's Chris Chibnall's fault. But her relationship with her companions, like Mandip Gill and Jodie Whittaker, seem to get on really well off screen, but on screen they don't seem to have any chemistry whatsoever. And then they've tried to be like, oh, actually, this is a deep romantic relationship here. Is it? Like, was I watching a different show? You know, the fact that even in Ryan's last story, they had to have a scene where she chatted to Ryan, and I had to genuinely sit and go, has she ever had a conversation with him at any point before? Just the two of them. I never felt the connection. There was too many companions, and the fact that this era is so empty to me doesn't help. Like, I don't enjoy many of the stories. There are some genuinely great stories in here. Demons of the Punjab, Haunting of Via Diodati. I really enjoy her swan song, The Power of the Doctor. And Jodie Whittaker gives some really good performances in this role. She's pretty good at the comedic stuff, and sometimes she brings good stuff to the dramatic stuff. But I don't know. I didn't warm to her initially. I'd kind of warmed to her a bit more by the end. But it's so important to me that the Doctor companion relationship is great, that I really feel invested in it, and I could not have cared less about any of this lot. And the way, like, I like Graham individually, but I have no connection with his relationship with the Doctor. And I think that's such a huge problem. Again, the era she's in is a big problem, and so much of what I'm saying is same with Colin Baker. But I feel like Colin Baker elevated the material. Paul McGann elevated the material. Martin and Whittaker are in poor material, and they don't really elevate it that much. I don't think the stories are better for having them in it. They may be good in the stories, but the stories don't feel better because of them. The bad stories are still that bad. Like, they really, really are. The TV movie is watchable because of Paul McGann. Even if it's a poor script, it's watchable because of Paul McGann. Terrible stories in the Jodie era are not watchable because of Jodie. They are just terrible. I think that's the difference. So we've got four of these lot left. We'll just take them in order. Troughton, A tier, above Eccleston, brilliant version of the character. The fact he's next to Matt Smith feels very fitting because they're, well, Matt Smith basically just took Patrick Troughton's characterization and added some bits, basically, didn't he? You know, and even down to the bow tie, like, they really took so much of Troughton and put him in Smith. I love his mischievous hobo thing, but he's also, I think, a darker, more nuanced character than people were really, really given credit for. Like, so often the stupid stuff is an act. Yes, he is legitimately a silly man though. Like, the bit and they arrive in Enemy of the World, and he just goes swimming, just like takes his shoes off and legs it into the water. Like, that's completely him. Um, but I love his just, you know, constantly impersonating people, his sense of authority that he brings into those. I think thinking of the War Games specifically when he impersonates the general, or no, the guy who's supposed to be investigating the prisons or something like that. And he brings so much fun to the role. He is the founding father of so much of what we view the character today as being. He's delightful on screen. He has a great rapport with Jamie and Victoria and Zoe, less so with Ben and Polly, but particularly with those three companions. He's great, and his era at its peak is probably the strongest run of the show that any Doctor has, consistently, in my opinion. Troughton era is probably the strongest. Like, well, obviously, the strongest era is Tom's first three series, but then if you bring in all of the other stuff, I think he's much further down the list. But Troughton has the strongest stories, in my opinion. So many great stories in that era. Power of the Daleks, Evil of the Daleks, Faceless Ones, Tomb of the Cybermen. You've got Web of Fear, Fury from the Deep, Enemy of the World, Mind Robber, Invasion, War Games. It's just littered with classics that whole way through. And I really love watching him in the role. I think he's my brother's favourite, he was telling me earlier. And I totally understand why anyone would have him towards the top of their list. Like, he is just delightful. The one that I'm unsure on, does Jon Pertwee go S or A? I'm going to go A. Top of A, could go into S. He was my introduction to the classic series. I started with Spearhead, and you could not have hoped for a better version to get me invested. He is very funny. He's quite spiky. I also think he's just another one people get wrong. They think, oh, he's all about authority and punching people, and he is very warm and delightful, and I do enjoy his very subtle character arc, in terms of which is just finding his home as really being Earth. The fact that in his final story he tells Sarah the TARDIS brought me home and it brought him to Unit HQ. Like he was imprisoned in Unit HQ basically at the start of the show. That's how I just love that family dynamic of the unit era, and he's such an integral part of that. I love the way he bounces off Delgado as the master. I think Joe Grant is my favorite companion of all time. I love their relationship. Um, I think the only reason he's not in S is there's a couple of stories where I think he's written too rude and abrasive. I'm thinking of the Daemons specifically, where he's kind of really arrogant for no reason, but it's not like with Tennant where it's an in-text thing. It's just he's rude. That's all you're getting. Um, yeah, I love Pertwee, suave. Who else could pull off the any of his outfits? No one else on the planet. He's the James Bond of doctors. I love Bessie. I love all the gadgets, even the Whomobile. Like I'm taking it all day long. I think it's great. I love the big 12-minute chase sequence in his last story. I think that's just the most Pertwee era thing you could possibly have devised. Just beautiful. uh, McCoy, also a top fifth or sixth. Oh, that's your spoiler that Capaldi is in the S tier. McCoy is excellent. He was one of the first class doctors I saw when I first bought some stories. I bought Remembrance of the Daleks. He pulls you in immediately. I love his comic, clownish buffoonery, and I love the darkness that hides. I think he is at his best when he is playing a manipulative doctor. I know some people find that kind of sort of wears on them by the end of his era, but I really enjoy it. I think he's just got such a great rapport with Ace, um, and yeah, I mean, I'm almost running out of just nice things to say by this point because I've talked about so many good versions of the character. But I think the darkness is really what sets him apart. He is the darkest version of this character, in my opinion, far more dark than John Hurt, who was, the man who won the Time War. Just really under the surface unsettling. I'm thinking of the scene where he tells, does he tell the Dalek, he manipulates the Dalek into essentially just self-destructing by telling him that his entire race and planet is gone. And I'm thinking of the scene where he looks that guy in the eye and he goes, do it then, pull the trigger, end my life. And he manipulates the soldier into giving him his gun. And I'm thinking of when he breaks Ace's spirit in Curse of Fenric, which I think is just one of the best moments in the show. He has such a nuanced, grown-up relationship with Ace. It's really great to watch unfold. My favorite Doctor is Peter Capaldi. A lot of people are in this boat now. It felt like when I first discovered Capaldi was my favorite was about like 4 or 5 years ago. And it was weird because I'd spent a long time thinking of the show from my childhood. As I loved Matt Smith, and Capaldi was fine, but I didn't really warm to him. But when I rewatched him as an adult, just adored him. I adored the nuances in his character. I love his relationship with Clara. I think every single line he delivers is perfect, legitimately perfect. And I think on average, across the whole thing, he is the best version of the character. He's a great rapport with his version of the Master, played by Michelle Gomez. He has a brilliant arc. I love how he changes up as he goes. That you get from series 8 with the Am I a Good Man stuff. Then you go series 9, where he almost feels like he tries to find the fun too much. And him and Clara get too invested in the life, and then it backfires spectacularly. And then in series 10, he really finds a lovely middle ground. I don't even know which of these versions of the character. It almost feels like 3 separate versions, but I love them all so much that I can look past maybe any people who go, well, if he's playing 3 different Doctors. He's not. I love the arc. I just love the character. I think Capaldi is one of the best things ever happened to the shows. He's a phenomenal brand ambassador. And I adore his version of the character. I really genuinely do. And I am more than happy to say Capaldi is first, Baker second, Hartnell third. I think that's a perfect top 3. And Pertwee 4, Smith 5, McCoy 6, Troughton 7, Eccleston 8, McGann 9, Tennant 10, Hurt 11th, Baker 12th, Tennant 13th, Davison 14th, Gatwa 15th, Jason 16th, 17th, Whitaker 18th, Martin. I feel very happy with that list. I feel like, yeah, I'm not. No, I completely agree with that. That I was thinking if I want to change anything around, but I genuinely think that that's correct. And largely, this character has been played amazingly. So many of these characters, so many in the S and A tier, I'd go back and rewatch these characters anytime. I just love them that much, and even the characters in the B tier are largely brilliant. So, yeah, this is my favorite fictional character of all time, and this is my list. I would love to know what your list is. That's me. I'm going to try and stop this recording. Goodbye.